The Murder on the Links by Agatha Christie. Read by Jonathan Oliver. Chapter 1. A Fellow Traveller. I believe that a well-known anecdote exists to the effect that a young writer, determined to make the commencement of his story forcible and original enough to catch and rivet the attention of the most blasé of editors, penned the following sentence. "Hell," said the Duchess. Strangely enough, this tale of mine opens in much the same fashion. Only the lady who gave utterance to the exclamation was not a duchess. It was a day in early June. I had been transacting some business in Paris and was returning by the morning service to London, where I was still sharing rooms with my old friend, the Belgian ex-detective, Hercule Poirot. The Calais Express was singularly empty. In fact, my own compartment held only one other traveller. I had made a somewhat hurried departure from the hotel, and was busy assuring myself that I had duly collected all my traps when the train started. Up till then, I had hardly noticed my companion, but I was now violently recalled to the fact of her existence. Jumping up from her seat, she let down the window and stuck her head out, withdrawing it a moment later with the brief and forcible ejaculation, "Hell!" Now, I am old-fashioned. A woman, I consider, should be womanly. I have no patience with the modern neurotic girl who jazzes from morning to night, smokes like a chimney, and uses language which would make a Billingsgate fishwoman blush. I looked up, frowning slightly, into a pretty, impudent face, surmounted by a rakish little red hat. A thick cluster of black curls hid each ear. I judged that she was little more than 17, but her face was covered with powder, and her lips were quite impossibly scarlet. Nothing abashed, she returned my glance and executed an expressive grimace. "Dear me, we've shocked the kind gentleman," she observed to an imaginary audience. "I apologize for my language. Most unladylike and all that, but, oh, Lord, there's reason enough for it. Do you know, I've lost my only sister." "Really?" I said politely. "How unfortunate." "He disapproves," remarked the lady. "He disapproves utterly of me and of my sister, which last is unfair because he hasn't seen her." I opened my mouth, but she forestalled me. "Say no more. Nobody loves me. I shall go into the garden and eat worms. Boo-hoo! I am crushed." She buried herself behind a large comic French paper. In a minute or two, I saw her eyes stealthily peeping at me over the top. In spite of myself, I could not help smiling, and in a minute she had tossed the paper aside and had burst into a merry peal of laughter. "I knew you weren't such a mutt as you looked," she cried. Her laughter was so infectious that I could not help joining in, though I hardly cared for the word mutt. "There! Now we're friends," declared the minx. "Say you're sorry about my sister." "I am desolated." "That's a good boy." "Let me finish. I was going to add that although I am desolated, I can manage to put up with her absence very well." I made a little bow. But this most unaccountable of damsels frowned and shook her head. "Cut it out. I prefer the dignified disapproval stunt." "Oh, your face." "Not one of us," it said. "And you are right there. Though, mind you, it's pretty hard to tell nowadays. It's not everyone who can distinguish between a demi and a duchess. Oh, there now, I believe I've shocked you again. You've been dug out of the backwoods, you have. Not that I mind that. We could do with a few more of your sort. I just hate a fellow who gets fresh. It makes me mad." She shook her head vigorously. "What are you like when you're mad?" I inquired with a smile. "A regular little devil. Don't care what I say or what I do either. I nearly did a chap in once. Yes, really. He'd have deserved it, too. Well, I begged, don't get mad with me. I shan't. I like you. Did the first moment I set eyes on you. But you looked so disapproving that I never thought we should make friends. Well, we have. Tell me something about yourself. I'm an actress. No, not the kind you're thinking of. I've been on the board since I was a kid of 6. Tumbling. I beg your pardon, I said, puzzled. Haven't you ever seen child acrobats? Oh, I understand. I'm American-born, but I've spent most of my life in England. We've got a new show now. We? My sister and I. Sort of song and dance and a bit of patter and a dash of the old business thrown in. It's quite a new idea, and it hits them every time. There's going to be money in it. My new acquaintance leaned forward and discoursed volubly, a great many of her terms being quite unintelligible to me. Yet I found myself evincing an increasing interest in her. She seemed such a curious mixture of child and woman. Though perfectly worldly wise, and able, as she expressed it, to take care of herself, there was yet something curiously ingenuous in her single-minded attitude towards life, and her wholehearted determination to make good. We passed through Amiens. The name awakened many memories. My companion seemed to have an intuitive knowledge of what was in my mind. Thinking of the war? I nodded. You were through it, I suppose? Pretty well. I was wounded once, and after the Somme, they invalided me out altogether. I'm a sort of private secretary now to an MP. My, that's brainy. No, it isn't. There's really awfully little to do. Usually a couple of hours every day sees me through. It's dull work, too. In fact, I don't know what I should do if I hadn't got something to fall back upon. Don't say you collect bugs. No. I share rooms with a very interesting man. He's a Belgian, an ex-detective. He's set up as a private detective in London, and he's doing extraordinarily well. He's really a very marvellous little man. Time and again he has proved to be right where the official police have failed. My companion listened with widening eyes. Isn't that interesting now? I just adore crime. I go to all the mysteries on the movies, and when there's a murder on, I just devour the papers. Do you remember the Styles case? I asked. Let me see. Was that the old lady who was poisoned? Somewhere down in Essex? I nodded. That was Poirot's first big case. Undoubtedly, but for him, the murderer would have escaped scot-free. It was a most wonderful bit of detective work. Warming to my subject, I ran over the heads of the affair, working up to the triumphant and unexpected denouement. The girl listened spellbound. In fact, we were so absorbed that the train drew into Calais station before we realized it. I secured a couple of porters, and we alighted on the platform. My companion held out her hand. Goodbye, and I'll mind my language better in future. Oh, but surely you'll let me look after you on the boat. Mayn't be on the boat. I want to see whether that sister of mine got aboard after all anywhere. But thanks all the same. Oh, but we're going to meet again, surely. Aren't you even going to tell me your name? I cried as she turned away. She looked over her shoulder. Cinderella, she said, and laughed. But little did I think when and how I should see Cinderella again. Chapter 2. An Appeal for Help. It was 9:05 when I entered our joint sitting room for breakfast on the following morning. My friend Poirot, exact to the minute as usual, was just tapping the shell of his second egg. He beamed upon me as I entered. You have slept well, yes? You have recovered from the crossing so terrible? It is a marvel. Almost you are exact this morning. Pardon, but your tie is not symmetrical. Permit that I'll rearrange it. Elsewhere I have described Hercule Poirot. An extraordinary little man. Height, 5 feet 4 inches, egg-shaped head carried a little to one side, eyes that shone green when he was excited, stiff military moustache, air of dignity immense. He was neat and dandified in appearance. For neatness of any kind he had an absolute passion. To see an ornament set crookedly, or a speck of dust, or a slight disarray in one's attire, was torture to the little man until he could ease his feelings by remedying the matter. Order and method were his gods. He had a certain disdain for tangible evidence, such as footprints and cigarette ash, and would maintain that, taken by themselves, they would never enable a detective to solve a problem. Then he would tap his egg-shaped head with absurd complacency, and remark, with great satisfaction, "The true work, it is done from within. The little grey cells. Remember always the little grey cells, mon ami." I slipped into my seat and remarked idly, in answer to Poirot's greeting, that an hour's sea passage from Calais to Dover could hardly be dignified by the epithet terrible. "Anything interesting come by the post?" I asked. Poirot shook his head with a dissatisfied air. "I have not yet examined my letters, but nothing of interest arrives nowadays. The great criminals, the criminals of method, they do not exist." He shook his head despondently, and I roared with laughter. "Cheer up, Poirot. The luck will change. Open your letters. For all you know, there may be a great case looming on the horizon." Poirot smiled, and taking up the neat little letter opener with which he opened his correspondence, he slit the tops of the several envelopes that lay by his plate. "A bill. Another bill. It is that I grow extravagant in my old age. Ah, a note from Jap." "Yes?" I pricked up my ears. The Scotland Yard inspector had more than once introduced us to an interesting case. "He merely thanks me, in his fashion, for a little point in the Aberystwyth case on which I was able to set him right. I am delighted to have been of service to him." Poirot continued to read his correspondence placidly. "A suggestion that I should give a lecture to our local Boy Scouts. The Countess of Forfanock will be obliged if I will call and see her. Another lapdog, without doubt. And now for the last." "Ah." I looked up, quick to notice the change of tone. Poirot was reading attentively. In a minute, he tossed the sheet over to me. "This is out of the ordinary, mon ami. Read for yourself." The letter was written on a foreign type of paper in a bold, characteristic hand. "Villa Geneviève, Melinville-sur-Mer, France. Dear Sir, I am in need of the services of a detective, and, for reasons which I will give you later, do not wish to call in the official police. I have heard of you from several quarters, and all reports go to show that you are not only a man of decided ability, but one who also knows how to be discreet. I do not wish to trust details to the post, but on account of a secret I possess, I go in daily fear of my life. I am convinced that the danger is imminent, and therefore I beg that you will lose no time in crossing to France. I will send a car to meet you at Calais, if you will wire me when you are arriving. I shall be obliged if you will drop all cases you have on hand, and devote yourself solely to my interests. I am prepared to pay any compensation necessary. I shall probably need your services for a considerable period of time, as it may be necessary for you to go out to Santiago, where I spent several years of my life. I shall be content for you to name your own fee. Assuring you once more that the matter is urgent. Yours faithfully, P.T. Renault." Below the signature was a hastily scrawled line, almost illegible. "For God's sake, come." I handed the letter back with quickened pulses. "At last," I said. "Here is something distinctly out of the ordinary." "Yes, indeed," said Poirot meditatively. "You will go, of course," I continued. Poirot nodded, He was thinking deeply. Finally, he seemed to make up his mind and glanced up at the clock. His face was very grave. "See you, my friend. There is no time to lose. The Continental Express leaves Victoria at 11 o'clock. Do not agitate yourself. There is plenty of time. We can allow 10 minutes for discussion. You accompany me, n'est-ce pas?" "Well, you told me yourself that your employer needed you not for the next few weeks." "Oh, that's all right. But this Mr. Renault hints strongly that his business is private." "Tut, tut, tut. I will manage Monsieur Renault. By the way, I seem to know the name." "Oh, there's a well-known South American millionaire fellow. His name's Renault. I don't know whether it could be the same." "But without doubt. That explains the mention of Santiago. Santiago is in Chile, and Chile, it is in South America. Ah, but we progress finely. You remarked the postscript. How did it strike you?" I considered. Clearly, he wrote the letter keeping himself well in hand. But at the end, his self-control snapped, and on the impulse of the moment, he scrawled those 4 desperate words. But my friend shook his head energetically. "You are in error. See you not that while the ink of the signature is nearly black, that of the postscript is quite pale?" "Well," I said, puzzled. "Mon Dieu, mon ami, but use your little grey cells. Is it not obvious? Monsieur Renault wrote his letter. Without blotting it, he reread it carefully. Then, not on impulse, but deliberately, he added those last words and blotted the sheet." "But why?" "Parbleu! So that it should produce the effect upon me that it has upon you." "What?" "Mary, to make sure of my coming. He reread the letter and was dissatisfied. It was not strong enough." He paused, and then added softly, his eyes shining with that green light that always betokened inward excitement. "And so, mon ami, since that postscript was added not on impulse but soberly, in cold blood, the urgency is very great, and we must reach him as soon as possible." "Merlinville," I murmured thoughtfully. "I've heard of it, I think." Poirot nodded. "It is a quiet little place, but chic. It lies about midway between Boulogne and Calais." "Monsieur Renault has a house in England, I suppose?" "Yes, in Rutland Gate, as far as I remember. Also, a big place in the country somewhere in Hertfordshire. But I really know very little about him. He doesn't do much in a social way. I believe he has large South American interests in the city, and has spent most of his life out in Chile and the Argentine." "Well, we shall hear all details from the man himself. Come, let us pack. A small suitcase each, and then a taxi to Victoria." 11 o'clock saw our departure from Victoria on our way to Dover. Before starting, Poirot had dispatched a telegram to Monsieur Renault, giving the time of our arrival at Calais. On the boat, I knew better than to disturb my friend's solitude. The weather was gorgeous, and the sea as smooth as the proverbial mill pond, so I was hardly surprised when a smiling Poirot joined me on disembarking at Calais. A disappointment was in store for us, as no car had been sent to meet us, but Poirot put this down to his telegram having been delayed in transit. "We will hire a car," he said cheerfully, and a few minutes later saw us creaking and jolting along in the most ramshackle of automobiles that ever plied for hire, in the direction of Merlinville. My spirits were at their highest, but my little friend was observing me gravely. "You are what the Scotch people call fey, Hastings. It presages disaster." "Nonsense. At any rate, you do not share my feelings." No, but I am afraid. Afraid of what? I do not know, but I have a premonition. Je ne sais quoi. He spoke so gravely that I was impressed in spite of myself. I have a feeling, he said slowly, that this is going to be a big affair, a long, troublesome problem that will not be easy to work out. I would have questioned him further, but we were just coming into the little town of Merlinville, and we slowed up to inquire the way to the Villa Geneviève. Straight on, monsieur, through the town. The Villa Geneviève is about half a mile on the other side. You cannot miss it. A big villa overlooking the sea. We thanked our informant and drove on, leaving the town behind. A fork in the road brought us to a second halt. A peasant was trudging towards us, and we waited for him to come up to us in order to ask the way again. There was a tiny villa standing right by the road, but it was too small and dilapidated to be the one we wanted. As we waited, the gate of it swung open and a girl came out. The peasant was passing us now, and the driver leaned forward from his seat and asked for direction. The Villa Geneviève, just a few steps up this road to the right, monsieur. You could see it if it were not for the curve. The chauffeur thanked him and started the car again. My eyes were fascinated by the girl who still stood with one hand on the gate, watching us. I am an admirer of beauty, and here was one whom nobody could have passed without remark. Very tall, with the proportions of a young goddess, her uncovered golden head gleaming in the sunlight. I swore to myself that she was one of the most beautiful girls I had ever seen. As we swung up the rough road, I turned my head to look after her. "By Jove, Poirot," I exclaimed. "Did you see that young goddess?" Poirot raised his eyebrows. "Ça commence," he murmured. "Already you have seen a goddess?" "But, hang it all, wasn't she?" "Possibly. I did not remark the fact." "Surely you noticed her." "Mon ami, two people rarely see the same thing. You, for instance, saw a goddess. I—" He hesitated. "Yes?" "I saw only a girl with anxious eyes," said Poirot gravely. But at that moment we drew up at a big green gate, and simultaneously we both uttered an exclamation. Before it stood an imposing sergent de ville. He held up his hand to bar our way. "You cannot pass, monsieur." "But we wish to see Monsieur Renaud," I cried. "We have an appointment." "This is his villa, isn't it?" "Yes, monsieur, but—" Poirot leaned forward. "But what?" "Monsieur Renaud was murdered this morning." Chapter 3. At the Villa Geneviève. In a moment, Poirot had leapt from the car, his eyes blazing with excitement. "What is that you say? Murdered? When? How?" The sergent de ville drew himself up. "I cannot answer any questions, monsieur." "True, I comprehend." Poirot reflected for a minute. "The commissary of police, he is without doubt within?" "Yes, monsieur." Poirot took out a card and scribbled a few words on it. "Voilà. Will you have the goodness to see that this card is sent in to the commissary at once?" The man took it, and turning his head over his shoulder, whistled. In a few seconds a comrade joined him and was handed Poirot's message. There was a wait of some minutes, and then a short, stout man with a huge moustache came bustling down to the gate. The sergent de ville saluted and stood aside. "My dear Monsieur Poirot," cried the newcomer, "I am delighted to see you. Your arrival is most opportune." Poirot's face had lighted up. "Monsieur Bex, this is indeed a pleasure." He turned to me. "This is an English friend of mine, Captain Hastings.
Monsieur Lucien Bex.
The commissary and I bowed to each other ceremoniously, and Monsieur Bex turned once more to Poirot.
Mon vieux, I have not seen you since 1909, that time in Ostend. You have information to give which may assist us?
Possibly you know it already. You were aware that I had been sent for.
No? By whom?
The dead man. It seems that he knew an attempt was going to be made on his life. Unfortunately, he sent for me too late.
Sacré tonnerre!
Ejaculated the Frenchman.
So he foresaw his own murder. That upsets our theories considerably. But come inside.
He held the gate open, and we commenced walking towards the house. Monsieur Bex continued to talk.
The examining magistrate, Monsieur Otet, must hear of this at once. He has just finished examining the scene of the crime, and is about to begin his interrogations.
When was the crime committed? Asked Poirot.
The body was discovered this morning about 9 o'clock. Madame Renault's evidence and that of the doctors goes to show that the death must have occurred about 2 a.m. But enter, I pray you.
We had arrived at the steps which led up to the front door of the villa. In the hall, another sergeant de ville was sitting. He rose at sight of the commissary.
"Where is Monsieur Otet now?"
inquired the latter.
"In the salon, monsieur."
Monsieur Bex opened a door to the left of the hall, and we passed in. Monsieur Otet and his clerk were sitting at a big round table. They looked up as we entered. The commissary introduced us and explained our presence. Monsieur Otet, the juge d'instruction, was a tall, gaunt man, with piercing dark eyes and a neatly cut grey beard, which he had a habit of caressing as he talked. Standing by the mantelpiece was an elderly man with slightly stooping shoulders, who was introduced to us as Dr. Durand.
"Most extraordinary,"
remarked Monsieur Otet, as the commissary finished speaking.
"You have the letter here, monsieur."
Poirot handed it to him, and the magistrate read it.
He speaks of a secret. What a pity he was not more explicit. We are much indebted to you, Monsieur Poirot. I hope you will do us the honor of assisting us in our investigations. Or are you obliged to return to London? Monsieur le Juge, I propose to remain. I did not arrive in time to prevent my client's death, but I feel myself bound in honor to discover the assassin.
The magistrate bowed.
These sentiments do you honor. Also, without doubt, Madame Renault will wish to retain your services. We are expecting Monsieur Giraud from the Sûreté in Paris any moment, and I am sure that you and he will be able to give each other mutual assistance in your investigations. In the meantime, I hope that you will do me the honor to be present at my interrogations, and I need hardly say that if there is any assistance you require, it is at your disposal. I thank you, monsieur. You will comprehend that at present I am completely in the dark. I know nothing whatever.
Monsieur Otet nodded to the commissary, and the latter took up the tale.
This morning, the old servant, Françoise, on descending to start her work, found the front door ajar. Feeling a momentary alarm as to burglars, she looked into the dining room. But, seeing the silver was safe, she thought no more about it, concluding that her master had without doubt risen early and gone for a stroll. Pardon, monsieur, for interrupting, but was that a common practice of his? No, it was not. But old Françoise has the common idea as regards the English, that they are mad and liable to do the most unaccountable things at any moment. Going to call her mistress as usual, a young maid, Leonie, was horrified to discover her gagged and bound, and almost at the same moment, news was brought that Monsieur Renault's body had been discovered, stone dead, stabbed in the back. Where? That is one of the most extraordinary features of the case. Monsieur Poirot, the body was lying face downwards in an open grave. What? Yes. The pit was freshly dug, just a few yards outside the boundary of the villa grounds. And it had been dead how long?
Dr. Durand answered this.
I examined the body this morning at 10 o'clock. Death must have taken place at least 7 and possibly 10 hours previously. That fixes it at between midnight and 3 a.m. Exactly. And Madame Renaud's evidence places it at after 2 a.m., which narrows the field still further. Death must have been instantaneous and naturally could not have been self-inflicted.
Poirot nodded, and the commissary resumed.
Madame Renaud was hastily freed from the cords that bound her by the horrified servants. She was in a terrible condition of weakness, almost unconscious from the pain of her bonds. It appears that 2 masked men entered the bedroom, gagged and bound her while forcibly abducting her husband. This we know at second hand from the servants. On hearing the tragic news, she fell at once into an alarming state of agitation. On arrival, Dr. Durand immediately prescribed a sedative, and we have not yet been able to question her. But without doubt, she will awake more calm and be equal to bearing the strain of the interrogation.
The commissary paused.
And the inmates of the house, monsieur? There is old Françoise, the housekeeper. She lived for many years with the former owners of the Villa Geneviève. Then there are 2 young girls, sisters, Denise and Léonie Houlard. Their home is in Merlinville, and they come of most respectable parents. Then there is the chauffeur, whom Monsieur Renaud brought over from England with him, but he is away on a holiday. Finally, there are Madame Renaud and her son, Monsieur Jacques Renaud. He, too, is away from home at present.
Poirot bowed his head. Monsieur Rotet spoke.
Marchot!
The sergeant de ville appeared.
Bring in the woman Françoise.
The man saluted and disappeared. In a moment or two he returned, escorting the frightened Françoise.
Your name is Françoise Arrichet? Yes, monsieur. You have been a long time in service at the Villa Geneviève? 11 years with Madame la Vicomtesse. Then, when she sold the villa this spring, I consented to remain on with the English milord. Never did I imagine...
The magistrate cut her short.
Without doubt, without doubt. Now, Françoise, in this matter of the front door, whose business was it to fasten it at night? Mine, monsieur. Always I saw to it myself. And last night? I fastened it as usual. You are sure of that? I swear it, by the blessed saints, monsieur. What time would that be? The same time as usual, 10:30, monsieur. What about the rest of the household? Had they gone up to bed? Madame had retired some time before. Denise and Léonie went up with me. Monsieur was still in his study. Then, if anyone unfastened the door afterwards, it must have been Monsieur Renaud himself.
Françoise shrugged her broad shoulders.
Oh, what should he do that for? With robbers and assassins passing every minute, a nice idea. Monsieur was not an imbecile. It is not as though he had to let the lady out.
The magistrate interrupted sharply.
The lady? What lady do you mean? Why, the lady who came to see him. Had the lady been to see him that evening? Well, yes, monsieur. And many other evenings as well. Who was she? Did you know her?
A rather cunning look spread over the woman's face.
How should I know who it was? She grumbled. I did not let her in last night.
Ah! Roared the examining magistrate, bringing his hand down with a bang on the table.
You would trifle with the police, would you? I demand that you tell me at once the name of this woman who came to visit Monsieur Renaud in the evenings. The police, grumbled Françoise. Never did I think that I should be mixed up with the police. But I know well enough who she was. It was Madame d'Aubray.
The commissary uttered an exclamation and leaned forward as though in utter astonishment.
That is the end of this side. The story continues on the other side of this cassette.